It's my pleasure to invite a very distinguished panel to come and join me here on the stage. As Tetet said, we're going to be hearing, to get us started today, from other stakeholders in development and to hear how they see us as civil society actors on the development scene, and in particular around the implementation and upholding and respecting our own principles, the Istanbul Principles. So if I could please have Her Excellency Judy Taguiwalo, I hope I'm pronouncing that not too badly, come and join me, and His Excellency Mr. Brendan Rodgers, and Dr. Mohammed MIZANUR Rahman, and finally Mr. Isaora Zefania Romahaldy. Thank you very much.
How are you? From the Philippines. I have a name tag. You don't have a name tag.
It's okay.
So we have several microphones. Okay.
I think we're okay. Yeah. I think we're
Another
okay.
one here.
Maybe another one there. Is Mr. Isaora Zefania Romahaldy here in the room from Madagascar? Okay, I think we are missing one of our speakers. I hadn't seen him this morning. So we will start. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us in this very exciting event. Tetet was mentioning how after 7 years is a good time to take a step back and to assess, evaluate, and re-engage in our work as civil society actors in development, and in particular around our own principles that we crafted and launched 7 years ago. And of course, in the development field, we do a lot of work at the country level, at the regional level, at the global level, with different government agencies as partners, as donors, as in multi-stakeholder dialogues, and a whole bunch of settings. So we thought we would start our day after our great keynote address by hearing from you as to how you perceive civil society 7 years after the adoption of the Istanbul Principles, how you've observed us, interacting with other stakeholders, doing our work in the development realm. So you have different experience working with civil society, so I think I'm very much looking forward to a very interesting conversation. So before we start, maybe I'll just make a very brief introduction for each one of you. So Secretary Judy Taguiwalo is the Minister of Social Welfare and Development in the Philippines. She was a social worker, or is a social worker in the Philippines, political activist, educator, and was nominated to her current position by the National Democratic Front to be part of the current cabinet. After being detained twice during the Marcos dictatorship and until her release after the EDSA revolution, or the EDSA revolution, she worked as professor in the College of Social Work and Community Development's Department of Women and Development Studies in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So thank you very much for being with us today. His Excellency Brendan Rodgers is the Ambassador of Ireland to Thailand at present. Mr. Rodgers was appointed Ambassador Designate of Ireland to the Kingdom of Thailand in 2014. Before that, he was Deputy Secretary General of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Director General of Development Cooperation Directorate of Irish Aid. He also worked for the United Nations Development Program in Zambia in 1987 before becoming the first Secretary of Political Division, Asia Section in the Department of Foreign Affairs. So quite a CV, and that's only part of it. So thank you for being here, Mr. Rodgers. Dr. Mohammad MIZANUR Rahman, thank you for being here. He's currently the Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Finance in Bangladesh. You are Deputy Secretary for Development Effectiveness Wing in particular, so very much relevant to the work, the discussion we're having here over the next 2 days. Economics Relations Division in the ministry. He was Policy and Coordination Specialist for the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in the past, and he has extensive experience working both in the international development realm, in international development organizations, and in different ministries in Bangladesh. So thank you for joining us as well. And hello, thank you for, we're glad you're here with us. We weren't sure if we had lost you. You had gone to a better conference somewhere else in the hotel. So my pleasure to introduce and welcome Mr. Isaura Zefania Romahaldy. Did I pronounce that right? Not too bad? Okay. He is the head of the Aid Coordination Permanent Secretariat of the Government of Madagascar. Thank you very much for being with us. Okay, so we have asked our guests to come prepared, but not with remarks. So we don't want them to read their remarks. We want to have a conversation. We're going to do this in 3 parts. So first of all, I would invite each of you to share with us what your experience with civil society has been. So in what context have you had the opportunity to engage with civil society, to interact with civil society? What types of civil society groups have you had experience with? Are you more familiar with local civil society groups or grassroots or national level, international, etc.? So just give us a sense so that we can situate your remarks afterwards of what your interaction with civil society has been to date. So we'll start with Ambassador Brandon, please.
I think you have to.
Does that work? That doesn't work? Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. I'm still getting used to being called His Excellency, by the way. After 14 years in Dublin, it's His Excellency. I'm looking around still. But anyway, I accept it at this stage. Before I came here, I was head of Irish Aid, essentially, and I was also head of a mission in Uganda, Rwanda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, as you mentioned, and then back in Dublin as the head of the program. But I always saw myself as a pragmatist, essentially, trying to achieve certain clear goals. And I've made a few bullet points. I have to say that Irish Aid, we believe, was one of the most effective, still is one of the most effective development cooperation programs in the world. And that's been, I think, reviewed a number of times by our peers in the OECD. But absolutely clear, that success could not have been achieved without working well and intensively with civil society. Part of the reason for our success is because we focused on working very clearly with civil society and of course with governments as well. And we were doing it, I think, a little bit ahead of other governments. As I travel all over Zambia, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Rwanda, all over the countryside, from the top of those countries to the bottom, I was always amazed and empowered and humbled by the groups of women and men and women and children and men and women that I met all over those countries. They built their own community halls. They were more empowered, I felt, than many of our own CBOs and NGOs back in Ireland. And I was humbled. And also, of course, I travelled back to the capital city then as the ambassador, the head of the aid program, and I sat across the table from the government ministers and all of the other officials that I had to deal with every day. And we had major programs and very important programs with those. But I was always able to say, to talking to the CBOs, and by the way, talking to our missionaries as well, who are out there all over those countries, this is not happening. I'm sorry, Your Excellency, the Minister, I've just been in Kasama last week. The school's not been built. People are very unhappy, right? So it was building those relationships, and we really felt we had to work at both levels. At the government level, where we had some influence and engagement, and also then, of course, with civil society. Now, when I went back then, of course, to Dublin, after 9 years in the field with the ministry, and before that with the UN, and arrived at HQ, I saw immediately that, yes, we focused, we funded NGOs, but we never talked to them. We actually never talked to them. And I was one of the very first directors that, but listen, we've got to call people in and have a conversation. And of course, in my own division at the time, people said, what do you mean? They're all out there, Troker, Justin Kilcullen, they're all out there and they're doing their own things and the missionaries. What are we doing bringing them in? Just give them the money, right? And the NGOs themselves, of course, said, well, look, those people in the Department of Foreign Affairs don't really know development because they're all diplomats and they're running around with Ferrero Rocher and drinking wine. They don't know about development, so we don't really want to talk to them either. So really, I had to bring these heads together, sit them around a table, and we found that we had a huge amount in common. And we found that we shared, of course, the same objectives, but that we were duplicating things. And they had certain policies and we had certain policies. So we started a new scheme called a multi-annual program scheme, which was a partnership together, a partnership in the field. And then we went, of course, in the field. We were at that stage, Irish Aid was scaling up, and we had a lot more money and a lot more engagement. And we tried to ensure, as well as we could, that we worked closely with the governments and with the NGO sector. Now, I can't say it was always easy. At that particular time, there was a democratic revolution in many of the countries where we worked, and some of the people who had been in opposition were now back in government. But of course, when you're in government, it's a slightly different matter. And civil society are, you know, biting at your toes and not really accepting all the difficulties, etc. But in any democracy, of course, it is so important to hold those in power to account. That is absolutely essential. Now, I have a few little bits of advice. Can I give those right now or later?
Yet.
All
later.
right. So, okay, thank you.
You very much, Mr. Rodgers. So you've mentioned several interesting points. One around the range. So you've been able to observe very local grassroots civil society, individuals actually coming together and working for their own communities and good. But then also your relationship with national level organizations, the interaction with local governments, and then your relationship with Irish NGOs when you went back to Ireland. The importance of dialogue, I really appreciate you mentioning that, right? It's not just about funding, and this is what we discuss often when we talk about the enabling environment, that we need, appropriate and adequate legislation. We need funding, of course, to do our work, but dialogue is so important, right? To have that opportunity to build real partnerships. So thank you for pointing that out as well. And we will come back to hear a little bit more about the successes, but also, of course, about the challenges. So let me turn to Dr. Rahman and ask you the same question. If you could give us a sense of what your experience has been with civil society and what context you have been able to work with and observe civil society in action.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. Good morning and assalamu alaikum. And it's, of course, a big challenge for me because I am a career civil servant, in fact, and civil servants, particularly in developing countries, are not considered good friends of CSOs, if not enemies, but things are changing, and I must appreciate the organizers particularly for inviting us and, in fact, listening to other sides of the voices. So this is, of course, a good opportunity to interact. So from Bangladesh perspective, I can say that first, I think we want to stress the importance of the civil society organizations as citizens of the world, because from my own experience, professional experience, and also as a citizen, active citizen, what I see the importance of the CSOs are that they are the real connectors between the people and the government and other establishments. So that is a major contribution currently the civil society organizations across the world making, in fact, and the promoting the marginalized voices, which sometimes, even despite good interest of the government cannot connect to the people, cannot reach out to the far-flung areas of the communities. But we see, despite scarce resources, the civil society organizations, they can make innovative approaches to reach out and to promote the voices. So this is wonderful contribution CSOs across the world is making. From our country perspective, we see that a good experience we are having. In fact, we do consult civil society organizations. This has been, in fact, customary in our public policy discourses, discussions, and dialogues. Even at the grassroots level, at the local unit of the government administration, we have formal meetings, formal dialogue spaces, and you all know that Bangladesh, in fact, we have a lot of civil society organizations. The largest NGO, the BRAC, it is also working from Bangladesh. Grameen Bank, they are all good examples of civil society activities. So we have both formal and informal dialogues. Before any public budget, before any public policy, we usually hold discussions with the civil society organizations. We invite their comments and feedbacks. And the major contribution, particularly currently I am coordinating with foreign aid policy for Bangladesh. We don't have a foreign aid policy. We are working. What we are expecting from the civil society organization, this is very sincere expectation from the government, that the research input, sometimes the civil society organizations, they consider things or review things from a different perspective. They provide alternatives. That is very helpful. And sometimes we see that civil society could be good strategic ally of the government, particularly in the global south, because when there is tension between the relationship, you understand the relationship north and south, so there is always a power game. But civil society, if government are strategic, so they can use the civil society power as a good strategic supporter for them. So in order to offset the challenges coming from the north or the powerful section. So we see very, very useful and good contributions from the civil society organizations in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much. Important reminder of how rich and diverse civil society is in Bangladesh, right? You have a very long history and very diverse, big NGOs, globally well known, but also very local grassroots, and a huge contingency of international development organizations that are working in Bangladesh as well. So a lot to build on for your comments on the importance of partnership and dialogue and consultation. So thank you very much for that. May I turn to you, Judy Taguiwalo? Am I saying that right? Taguiwalo. We'd love to hear from you. Is there only one microphone working over there?
We don't know how to operate.
If
the
somebody
other
could come and see if they can help us with that discreetly, that would be great.
Okay, hi everyone. I've been secretary in the government for only 9 months, but I've been with civil society organizations all my life, at least, starting when I was 18 years old as a student activist. So being here now to talk about the effectiveness of civil society organization from a government viewpoint is a new experience for me, but I'm happy that we are doing this in a conversation style. I would like to say hi to many of my colleagues here. Professor Dandan and I were colleagues at the University of the Philippines. I'm happy to know that now you are the UN expert for international solidarity. And then my colleagues at the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, many of them are here. And then my colleagues with the International League of People's Struggle, some of you are here. And siyempre, the Filipinos are here. So let me tell you about, last Sunday I was in southern Luzon to look into the assistance given by the government, by the department on victims of a major typhoon that made landfall last December 25. So my department, Social Welfare and Development, is tasked to provide, we chair the response cluster of the National Disaster Risk and Reduction Council of the Philippines. And we are supposed to provide the initial relief for the victims of typhoon, as well as help them rebuild their homes. So I'm citing this because people's organizations talk to me, and they held streamers and banners, and I told them, oh, before I was the one holding demonstrations, now people are demonstrating with me. I think what they asked for were actually two of the characteristics of CSOs represented by people's organizations in the country: speaking truth to power. They said, we didn't receive any assistance at all from your department. And they read a letter condemning the regional director of the department who was with me, and telling him, you gave to people, but to us you didn't give anything. So that's one. I think that's a very important role of civil society organization, speaking truth to power, but not just speaking, because what's good is speaking if there is no action. Two, in this particular case, making sure that government deliver services and assistance to the marginalized communities and peoples who need it most. So I think in this particular instance, and as secretary, I hope to be able to do that. Listen to the civil society organization and provide the assistance that they need because we are supposed to serve them.
Thank you very much. And that links up to the whole international conversation about around localization and how important it is to support and empower local organizations, in particular in times of crisis, right? When they're the first respondents and able to...
No, excuse me, Julia, I think it's the other way around. Because they're empowered, we're not supposed to empower them. Actually, they are empowered. The problem is government doesn't listen to them unless they're extension of those in power. So it is important for us in government, and I adopted it already as one of my core values, patas na pagtrato sa komunidad. Equal treatment of people regardless of political affiliation. Because government well, not all, but those in power tend to provide services to those who supported them during election.
So let's hear from Madagascar. And what is Alglenjumai? Oh, Alglenjumai.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for being late. I have an issue with time difference, I think. From the perspective of a partner country as Madagascar, how we deal with the CSO at national level. Actually, the Secretariat that I am working for is the national focal point of implementation of the Paris Declaration, Busan Partnership, and so on. So my intervention will be focused on that side. As we know, since the Paris Declaration, almost all of the partner countries has established this kind of mutual accountability mechanism where we have a permanent dialogue between development partners and the government. At this point of time, we have never had the participation of civil society, private sector, and so on. It's only in 2011, after Busan, we have seen this indicator too, who were recommending the participation of all these non-state actors into the dialogue. We have started to initiate how we can talk with the civil society and bring them on the table of the dialogue where we decide on how the strategic direction of how to manage with development partners at country level. Our mechanism actually has this kind of, I think it's almost the same in the partner countries, the levels of dialogue, the strategic and political one, and then the sectoral dialogue, the sectoral platform for coordination. So we could, at this point of time, we could bring the civil society on the table at the first level. So they are permanently participating in the discussions where the government meets with the development partners, with the parliament, with the private sector, and now with the civil society. But the problem here is that we still have problems to bring them in each of the sectoral platforms of coordination. I will come back on what's the reason of this. And in terms of assessment, in the same line, we all know that the OECD is undertaking this kind of survey every 2 years, where we have a list of questions that we are supposed to measure at national level. And we are taking this template that is sent by OECD, the joint support team, and all the guiding questions that they are putting in that template, we have transformed it to a structured questionnaire. So at this time, we have a unique questionnaire, something like 6 or 8 pages, where we have gathered all of the questions that we are supposed to measure at national level, and we have started to send it to the civil society. The last survey, they have fully responded to that questionnaire by organizing 3 workshops, one in the capital city and 2 others in the 2 regions, with the contribution from the European Union, who is actually the development partner funding the CSO empowerment in national level. So they are organizing this focus group to respond collectively to the questionnaire, and then send it to us to be computed along with the 10 indicators and sent out to the OECD and so on. But the purpose is not only to respond to the OECD survey. Our perspective is to keep this questionnaire functioning like every year or at any time we need it, and then also to add some more questions for interest of the government to effectively measure the participation of civil society in the development process. To conclude, I will some challenges that we have.
Can we come back to that in a second?
Yes.
Challenges?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So thank you all of you for your opening remarks. I think we've heard, not dissimilar messages from all of you around the importance of dialogue, of participation, the different efforts that are being deployed to ensure more equitable partnerships with civil society, involving listening to civil society, and the value that you all place in your different contexts to that relationship, and to ensuring that civil society is part of the conversations at different levels around development. So thank you for that. But we do want to hear about some of the challenges, and I know you're all ready for that too, because part of why we're here, but also one of our principles stresses the importance of learning, right? And how do we move forward? So we have these principles that guide our work globally, that inform the way we go about doing our work as actors in our own right. What are some of the challenges that you have seen? How do you understand those challenges? Do you have suggestions of how civil society or other stakeholders working with civil society can overcome some of those challenges? So why don't we start again with you? Thank you. Mr. Rodgers.
Well, look, there are a lot of challenges. That's the bottom line. We wouldn't be here if there weren't. And we look at poverty all over the world. We look at disempowerment. That's why we have the SDGs following on from the MDGs. I mean, some of the and I've been out of the development business for a little while, but I know, for example, development cooperation is becoming less important. When I was in Zambia first, we were a big donor. There was a small budget, and we had real leverage with government in terms of our principles, etc. Now, in a sense, we're victims of success. Budgets are much larger, there's a lot more money around, leverage is different, governments are changing, the externalities are changing, governments want to actually reduce development cooperation, which is a very good thing, regain power for themselves. There's a security agenda, really, international terrorism, security, and this can be used occasionally, in many occasions, to reduce the space of civil society. And I think that one of the human problems of power is that power must always, you said you need to speak truth to power. Power always has to be challenged, regardless of what level it is at, because there is a general gravitational pull for those people in power, from small committees to larger committees, to consolidate that power and to see challenge as a fundamental undermining of their legitimacy, rather than as a normal and natural human interaction. So civil society is under pressure. Some of the other challenges are probably disconnects between the North and the South. NGOs in the North are powerful institutions in their own way, and perhaps NGOs and CBOs in the South see them as part of the institutional problem as well. So there's that issue. And also then, I mean, civil society is a very wide church, really. We're talking about people who implement, really, service providers. We're talking about people who empower. We're talking about people who are who are really looking for human rights, environmental rights, all sorts of very different issues. So how do we all come together and share those values and share those objectives and still retain the ability to be effective? The challenge as well, certainly when I was head of the aid program, was to make ourselves effective. We moved from a project approach to a program approach because we simply found that after 20 years in the business, things hadn't really changed. You know, people were getting poorer, so something was wrong. So the whole development effectiveness, looking at outcomes, is very, very important. But it's equally important for civil society also, and you're doing it, I think, to look at yourselves, to determine how can you be effective. Lastly, you're all working in very, very different environments. There are governments who are open to you, who are difficult but engage with you. There are governments who are intimidatory. And you need different tactics in all of those. How can you make a difference without putting your lives in danger? All of those things. So there's a lot of challenges. I mean, a lot of them. But there are solutions. I mean, I'm generally an optimist. I think when I see Ireland last year passing the Marriage Equality Act in my lifetime. This was a country that voted against divorce in 1986, and last year it votes for the Marriage Equality Act. And why did that happen? That happened because of civil society. That shows the power of civil society.
Thank you very much. So you're pointing to a wide range of challenges that I'm sure are not unfamiliar to the room, including the diversity of us as a sector and the diversity of the context that we have to work in, and how being effective in those contexts is definitely, by definition, a challenge. And interesting to think about the principles in that respect, right? We did this massive effort to distill and simplify in a way, 8 things that we thought should guide our work everywhere and anywhere, and no matter what kind of civil society group you are, what the nature of your work and the nature of the context you're living in or working in, that these should help provide, put you on the road to more effectiveness. No? So interesting, I think, for us to be thinking about that as we're checking in on the principles over the next 2 days. So what about your experience in Bangladesh, and what challenges are you seeing emerging? What would you point to as the most significant ones?
Okay, thank you so much again. But I start with agreement on 2 points on Excellency Ambassador. One, we need to focus on that the development cooperation is really getting, less importance nowadays. So this should be an agenda for all of us to revisit the entire thing. And the second agreement, as he mentioned, the power of the civil society, how it has contributed to the transformation of a particular society. So I agree with that you are all powerful here. So now back on the challenges, and in fact it will be based on my own country experiences. So as you all understand that there are 2 factors, one the external and the internal. As the organizer instructed me, in fact, I got an email where they have suggested us to discuss things very honestly and objectively, so I am taking the opportunity. The external factor, as you understand, the rise of the illiberal democracy across the world, we are seeing this is a new phenomenon, in fact, in most of the countries. So the space for contestation, a space for communication, a space for providing alternatives are getting, in fact, limited. So this is the external. It is happening all around, almost all in all countries. So having realized it, so I now focus on the internal, the challenges, in fact, associated with the civil society organizations themselves. And I think if the civil society organizations want to be real actors of development, champions of development, they need to be mindful about all those challenges. And from my own experience, what I see that the rise of oligarchy in the civil society organizations. So there are 2 kinds of civil society organizations. One are, in fact, really grassroots. They have evolved and emerged from within the society. But unfortunately, they are marginalized. So there are there are marginalization dynamics within the civil society constituency. So that is important. So these grassroots civil society organizations are not coming to the establishments, are not connected to those who are holding powers. So there is an oligarchy of the elites, in fact, those who are professionals, good consultants, and they do have good communication ability, so they can reach out to the donors, they can reach out to the government, and government, in other words, using them as a part of legitimizing their own policy. So when they say, yes, we consult the civil society organization, meaning these elites are going to them and they are having discussion with them. So grassroots points are being ignored and marginalized. So this is an important point. I think the civil society organization can look at it. The other point could be the politics. Some of the civil society leaders, particularly in Bangladesh, you know, there are huge potential in back in 1990s, in fact, when democracy was restored in Bangladesh. But unfortunately, because of political ambitions of some of the civil society leaders, so in fact, this potentiality has been lost. And so this is a big challenge, and it contributed two ways. One, it makes your point apolitical, meaning your engagement is very less and low. And in other words, you are getting politicized. So again, so leadership is getting networked with the elites, political elites, but at the same time, you are marginalizing your own work. You are losing your legitimacy of your work. So this is a two-way impact. So the politics, so this is very dangerous, I think. And the other point, I also, so this is, I call it elephant in the room. We realize it, but hardly we talk on it. The leadership changes the civil society organization. Almost in all established civil society organizations, those who are resourceful in terms of getting huge fund, we don't see, in fact, change of leadership even for last 2-3 decades even. The same people, they're leading the organization. So you are advocating for ownership, you are advocating for democratization, but unfortunately sometimes your organizations, that miss these basic principles of democracy and ownership. So this is another point. So, and the dependence on the external fund, in fact, that limit your work independence. That is important. So, and taking all things, the Western narratives as part of democratization, I think there is a misgiving here, because there is a special context in all societies. So if you want to be a true change maker, then you need to be mindful about the context of the or the situation you are working with. So just Westernization doesn't necessarily mean modernization, doesn't necessarily mean even democratization, because democratization is a big thing, comprehensive thing, and it requires, in fact, continued engagement and of course should be aligned with the context. So these are the basic challenges so far I have.
Okay, wow, that's a handful. Thank you very much for that. Lots for us to work with there. So, you know, this idea of the international NGO elites and the exclusion of grassroots, marginalization of grassroots organizations, very important point. And the importance, I think we talk a lot about equitable partnerships, and it's one of our key principles, but, you know, are we most perhaps challenged, or is the priority for us to be really looking internally at our own relationships within civil society? The apolitical question, very important. Partisan issues, I think everywhere we deal with that. The elephant in the room around rotation and sharing leadership, building new leadership, definitely something that we often struggle with. And the dependence on external funds, and external not being foreign necessarily, I think, but our incapacity to generate our own funds in an autonomous way, and how that influences or can influence and limit our agendas. Very important challenges. Thank you very much for that. So I would turn to you now.
Actually, I totally agree with the two of you. I think you presented the challenges to the CSOs. I would just like to add that, the question of accountability, the question of making sure that the CSO, which starts with really good intentions of serving the poor, of assisting marginalized communities, are co-opted in the process. Because, it can be very seductive attending international conferences, not speaking to power, but being part of the power can be very seductive, no? So I'm very glad. I think I would just like to add another one. I think the major challenge would be to continually ask us the question of for whom. For whom are we doing this? For whom who are we serving at the end of the day? So,
Thank you very much. So not losing sight, given all these challenges that we've been talking about, giving some of our limitations, to not lose sight of why we're doing this in the first place, right? And how do we remain true to our missions and our purpose in navigating all of this? Definitely a potential pitfall for all of us. So I will lend you my microphone again. You over there. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think almost all of the challenges are similar, as has been said by the previous speakers. I will just point out some points additionally to those that has been said. I think the first challenges that we have realized is the alignment of the internal organization of the civil society as a group to what the government has. I mean, when we have this dialogue between all the stakeholders around the development process of the country, it's based on the National Development Plan, and when we divided the sectoral dialogues, we have a different structure compared to the ones that the civil society has. So one of the first recommendation was that the civil society should have also the same structure as the government. We understand that they are free, they are not obliged to follow this, but if we have this dialogue at the strategic and political level, which is actually spread out into the 19 sectoral dialogues. And if the civil society doesn't have the same structure to follow the decision at this sectoral, then there is not a continuity. And the second challenge is the mutual understanding of the role that the civil society should have in the whole process. I will not say here what has been what is the from the civil society side, but at least from the government side, there is this problem of understanding of role. In a country like mine, which is usually unstable, politically unstable, and one of the poorest countries in the world also, the government sees the role of the civil society interfering in the politics. I think the most important blocking factor is lying on that. The first thing that the civil society is attempting to say, it's not me actually, but it's the government, always link this role with the political position of the people leading the civil society organization. And the funds, actually the civil society were funding by 1, 2, or 3 development partners. Especially if it's a bilateral development partner, then it makes a lot of problems on interfering the political agenda of the country. But what we have recommended out of assessment is also to set up a basket fund where all the development partners will put all their money in one basket, so then we will not link the civil society action to a specific development partners. We are doing this now, starting this year. I think that is almost additionally to the challenges that has been said by my colleagues. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So again, some very interesting additions around alignment, around the political nature of some of the work that civil society does, or the positions it takes, and how that might come in the way of some of the collaborative work that the government in Madagascar is trying to do. Interesting point you brought up about how civil society might not be organized in a way thematically that best mirrors what the government is trying to engage civil society around. So that's something to keep in mind, what we can do about that. And then the whole funding question, again, I think you brought it back to this specific agendas or political agendas around that. So thank you very much. So maybe I'd just ask each one of you, as we're in the first plenary, and so just to kind of set the tone for the rest of the 2 days, if you're putting yourselves in our shoes, so we're civil society groups from around the world, we're going to be meeting for the next 2 days, taking a deep look at, many of the challenges that you have put before us, looking at our principles as, a tool, a framework that can help guide potential solutions or action that we need to take to address some of these. What would be your advice for this group that's here today? What would you be doing if you were one of us? Where would you put the emphasis or the focus of our work as we reflect on, our enhancing and strengthening our effectiveness and our engagement with our principles over the next 2 days and moving forward? So just your quick thoughts on that.
I was scribbling some words of advice as I was coming down this morning. So I just 3 or 4 here. I thought, well, number one, be proud of your achievements. That's very, very important because they have been many. So you should be proud of what you have achieved to date. But don't rest on your laurels at the same time. Continue to examine what you're doing and how to do it better. Continue to hold governments to account on their commitments to the SDGs and to development effectiveness. You absolutely have to do that. And monitoring and evaluation is very important as part of that in the sense of holding governments to account and then, of course, holding your own work to account as well. Build coalitions around certain issues. You're a wide church and you're working in a wide range of countries. So look at certain themes, look at what you have in common, and build those coalitions around those themes. Stay united, despite the differences that you may have, internally on the ground, or intra-country, or between the North and the South. Your unity is your strength, so stay united. Be inclusive and representative. Just going back to what you were saying, always look, are we representing the grassroots? Are we representing the people that we should be representing? We've been in the structure for a long time. Have we become disconnected? So all the time go back and have a look at, are you being inclusive? North and South should not be divided. You have much more in common than divides you. So as far as possible, work with the NGOs and the CBOs in the North to the next step. So it shouldn't be a zero-sum game. The good is not the enemy of the perfect. Achieve the good first. Never lose your energy and your passion. That's what drove me. That's why I'm still passionate about what I do. Never lose that. That's what drives you along. That's what makes you so effective. And as I said earlier, power always has to be brought to account. I'm sorry, absolute power leads to absolute dictatorship. That's the nature of history. So all the time, every power structures within the CBOs, NGOs, regionally, nationally, internationally, all those powerful people have to be held to account. And those who are genuine will welcome that.
Okay, thank you. Great piece of advice. Mr. Rahman.
So the ambassador eventually turned into a professor of the university. So he has detailed all suggestions for what we need to do. So I echo all his points, in fact. So my suggestion would be that unity should be first and foremost among the civil society organizations, because you need to stand up, because you are, again I repeat, that you are the connection point between the citizen and the government and other establishments. So this particular reference, this particular strength should not be lost in order to protect the humanity and the society. And you must situate yourself because of this SDG. This is a big deal for all of us. So I think you need to stay relevant in this huge discourse. And also the other point should be that we need to strengthen the grassroots organizations, because they tell us the real story of life. So the grassroots organizations should be supported, should be enabled to work better, should be enhanced in terms of their capacity and access to other actors and networks. And finally, I say that united we stand, divided we fall. So again, unity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. Again, I totally agree with the two of you. I would just like to add 3 points. One, in my short time in the government, I realized government has a lot of resources. A lot of resources. When I was in the university and we were assisting communities affected by the storm, it will take us like 1 month to gather together 500 family food packs to bring to damaged communities, but the government has billions of pesos. So there are the resources there. Civil society organizations can help, the grassroots communities bring those resources to communities actually needing it. That's a major challenge. Two, but the major challenge also has its own pitfalls. Police our rank so that corruption will not become, will not taint us, will not erode us, will not tempt us, because there is corruption also in civil society organizations in the Philippines. We have seen that, and I think we need to be careful about that. Third, and I think it's important, I think many of us here know that the problems we are dealing with, violence against women, poverty, environmental degradation, are just symptomatic of deeper structural issues and social inequalities. We should go beyond the surface analysis of problems, look at the roots, and then build the solidarity to end, to end the roots of the problems of the majority of our people, whether in the north or on the south. Do you agree with me? Okay, so.
I think almost all of the things has been said by the previous speakers, but as from the government side, when we look at the principles and all these international commitments, if all of them are implemented, we will see the civil society really very powerful. And I think the governments are afraid of that. And even myself, I'm within the government, I will tend to say that we will be afraid of the civil society power if all these things will be happening at national level. Otherwise, from myself now, I will be speaking from my personal view, but not from the government side. I really understand that the gap is very huge. Once again, in the context of one of the poorest countries in the world, the gap is very, very huge between the government, the leaders, and the people. So my only recommendation will be from the side of the people. Thank you very much.
Just one last point, in fact. So I of course recommend that you hold the government to account. You also hold your leadership to account.
Okay, that's right. Yes, thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our great panelists and their recommendations. Don't leave yet. Thank you very much. I think we've heard a lot. My colleagues in the room will forgive me for not leaving time for Q&A, but I thought it was important that if we're in listening mode, we listen. And there was such richness of what all of you had to say. And I think we have a lot to work through and chew through over the next 2 days from what we've heard here today. I just wanted to remark, there was a bit of a common thread from many of your comments around the importance of unity and the way you said it, united, divided you fall, and the reminder that it's so important for all of us to work together despite our differences, despite the north-south, grassroots, larger professional differences and divides that we have. And just to remind ourselves that the Istanbul principles that we're here to discuss for 2 days are a manifestation of that unity, right? We were able to generate those principles by broad concerted work across many, many countries, thousands of civil society groups, northern groups, international groups, very grassroots organizations, all coming together and agreeing on a set of principles that inspire and guide our work. So yes, we have challenges and a lot of work to do, but we have a very solid ground to build on for that. So thank you very much for your inspirational and challenging comments, exactly what we needed, and thanks for joining us again.